Hello, my name is Jeremy Zaire, and I'm going to give you a presentation today about getting started with AngularJS. You can see links to my blog, LinkedIn, Twitter, all that stuff here. So what is AngularJS? Probably heard a lot about it. It's kind of been a buzz in the JavaScript community. And basically it's an open source JavaScript MVC/MVVM framework. And those MVC, MVVM, those are design patterns. MVC, Model View Controller, and MVVM standing for Model View View Model. And it's one of several JavaScript frameworks that are popping up to sort of help that help fill the same type of need, which really is to help manage the complexity of your client-side JavaScript code. Maybe you're familiar with designing with jQuery. You can see for big apps and for single-page apps, jQuery can get unwieldy at times. So that's why there's all these different frameworks like AngularJS along with Backbone and Knockout, trying to fill this gap of making your JavaScript code easier to maintain. So AngularJS achieves all this by extending your HTML vocabulary with your own elements and attributes. So think of it as you're no longer restricted to just using divs and p tags for paragraphs and all the other stuff. You can actually create your own and you link them all together with code. So then it makes your document, your HTML, more readable. So you can be looking at your HTML and actually infer what it does by looking at it, which is quite a powerful feature, and we'll see a lot of this as I dive into the rest of the examples later on. AngularJS has built-in HTTP and more importantly REST API web service integration. So the built-in HTTP stuff, that's nothing new. I mean, we're familiar with jQuery having this through the AJAX methods, but really what's nice about it is integrating the REST API. So there's an Angular module called ng resource that integrates with the REST API very, very well, and we'll also be going over that in the presentation today. It includes its own client-side templating language. So this is kind of a trend among modern web design, is that you hook up with a REST API on a server, and you have that server also serving up HTML, and that's what can be included in the page to render your client-side template. So you're not actually having like something like PHP where you might do a PHP request, you're gonna get HTML and it's gonna have a bunch of PHP code embedded on it from the server side. So instead you have those templates on your client side, because when you really think about it, your view part of your application is same type of view that you've heard of in Model View Controller. That view is your UI. You don't have much of a view on the server. Most of the time if you're using something like PHP or whatever, you're generating all the HTML and generating it all on the server to send it to the client side. But one of the trends is to be using a client side template. So you have your HTML, things that are used for styling your data models. You have them on the client side. And you can fetch them from the server, but usually just in straight HTML. And you take care of all the inserting of things into the template on the JavaScript side. And there are also several templating languages that have popped up that you can integrate, even with jQuery. It's not something that you necessarily have to use one of these other MVC JavaScript frameworks for. But Angular itself, the way it does it, it implements its own client-side templating language. So AngularJS uses two-way data binding to allow the model to be used as a source of truth. So your model is really representing the data that's underneath your application, that everything comes from that. So instead of maybe something you're used to before is hiding some data in some hidden input fields, or attaching them to some attributes and just kind of pulling them out that way, no longer is that that's never really a great pattern to use in your client-side front-end engineering. So you have this two-way data binding to bind your input elements to directly to the data. That way you know where to go look if there's been a change. You just look at the model. You don't have to try and have something change in an input field and you're grabbing that input field directly and trying to see what it is to control something else. That model is the source of truth, so you look at the model and all your changes and all your architecture is built on top of that. AngularJS also has client-side routing to enable creating single-page apps. So that is something that is, of course, also, it's almost not even a modern trend anymore. It's kind of become commonplace with, the whole Web 2.0. That's really what that all meant, was having a single-page app where you use AJAX calls to fetch data, bring new data in, and format it. So AngularJS has built-in client-side routing to allow you to create these single-page apps a lot easier. So, and AngularJS is sponsored by Google. When you look at the logo and everything, it's AngularJS by Google, and there are a lot of contributions by Google employees. But it's also on GitHub as a public repository. So for now, it's it's something that we can all contribute to and we can all grab. So moving on. So what are the requirements to bring AngularJS into your web app design? It does not require jQuery, but it will use it if you have it. So it has its own implementation of jQuery functionality that it will use. So all the functionality that it needs, it can use it. But if you have jQuery that's already loaded in your page, it will go ahead and use that instead. So that's kind of nice that you don't have to necessarily include jQuery if you can get by without it. So that's jQuery is a big library, adds a lot of extra functionality, but it also comes out of the drawback of size and all that other stuff. So you can implement AngularJS in subsections of your page, so you can interoperate with other components. So you can, if you have a part of your page in jQuery and part of your page in Angular, Angular provides hooks to be able to key into the AngularJS functionality. So if you have things outside, you can have them do things and even manipulate the model, but you have ways to tie in. But it also doesn't require, even if you decide to not really tie any functionality of an AngularJS part of your app with a jQuery part or anything, you can still, it doesn't like take over control of your whole page. You can just have this is important to talk about because we're not always having the luxury where we can just convert a whole page of our site over to AngularJS. Maybe the easier continuous integration type of incremental rollout is you implement one part of it in AngularJS, release it, and then work on implementing other parts later. So it's important for that to be able to interoperate. The testing examples that are on the AngularJS documentation on their website, are given in Jasmine and ran using Karma. So these are a couple other programs that you might have to integrate into your web development architecture and sort of your system, your build process. There's others that can be used, but those are the ones that are given the most examples and directly in the AngularJS documentation. So the minified size is 100K, gzip down is 37K, and that ng resource I had mentioned earlier, that's what is a component, and it's actually not baked in, but it's a component provided by the AngularJS team, and it's 3K minified, so usually you end up using that. So and I just mentioned this too because it's sometimes useful to compare this to other frameworks, their size, to understand the overall impact that it's going to have on your app and your loading and your performance. So I have this little quote up here just to kind of set the tone for the rest of the presentation from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I highly recommend. It's a great book. To learn and not to do is really not to learn. To know and not to do is really not to know. So the real key there being, unless we do things, it's really tough to learn them and it's really tough to know them. We have to get in there and do stuff. So the rest of the presentation, or at least this second part of the presentation, is some examples of AngularJS showing completely working code. And then once we understand what the framework provides and how it does it, then we'll go and we'll talk a little bit more about the bigger picture of why AngularJS could be considered for one of your next web applications that you design. So all of these next examples are going to have a fully working plunker, which is kind of it's a service out there like JS Fiddle, where you put the code out and it's online and it's accessible and you can run and execute the code in browser and see it work and change it and modify it out on the web and have it instantly modified, so you don't have to worry about setting up a environment, web development environment, setting up an Apache server, all that good stuff. You can just so it's a way to demonstrate client-side code and solving problems. So we'll have lots of these examples. And the great thing about that too is that these are all public, so you can take them, you can fork them off, you can change what you want, and even provide another example to somebody else or to save with your own account. It's all free, all public out there. So we're gonna go through starter AngularJS app, keeping it really simple to start, and then we'll evolve what we're doing and what we're teaching from the ground up. So and also so we're just gonna define some JavaScript objects in a controller to represent the models in our application. And then we're going to display the object using the AngularJS built-in templating system. And this is about one of the most simple starting points that you can have. And some of the conventions that I use in the code throughout these examples, I have the types of models that I'm using are a teen, a toddler, and an adult. So toddler being beginner, teen being sort of intermediate, and adult being advanced. So you'll see these a lot. They don't have any, particular, they all sort of have the same fields, but just to sort of demonstrate, to keep some useful examples out there with different systems. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this and bring up this plunker next. So what we're going to take a look at is just that basic. It's a basic data model. And we're going to use toddlers to start because that's our beginner, and we're going to just show a very basic. So this is the HTML file you can see over here in Plunker. These are the names of your files. Up at the top you have your stop and play button. So if you stop it, it won't have the preview screen off to the right, but if you run it, it will use your HTML and generate. And I'm going to pause for a second while I switch the resolution on the code so it's a lot easier to see. Alright, so here we go. So I've got the app here, and this is the HTML, and what you see down here, nothing crazy here, but what you'll know about Angular is you'll see these ng prefixed attributes. So when you see that, you know that it's an Angular piece of functionality, and it's actually Angular directive. We'll talk more about what a directive means. So to start an app, how you initialize it is you have an ng app directive, and in a lot of the examples they show an ng app directive on your HTML tag, but really this ng app can be anywhere on any element that you have. And then another part down here is you have the ng controller. So you have your app, and within your app you have a controller. And then what we have here is just we're saying this is the AngularJS part of it. We're saying we have a table, repeat for toddler and toddlers, and toddler, this is just a JSON object that has name, birthday, and happy attributes, with using these double curly for the AngularJS templating to mean, input that value of that into between these TD tags. So, and what the model behind the scenes, as I click over to the script.js, is we have this my app here matches that ng-app attribute that we put on the HTML tag. And then we're going to define a controller with toddler controller, and that matches the name of the controller from our HTML and that ng-controller attribute. And also notice a funny kind of thing. You have my app and toddler controller, but when we go back to the HTML, we just put it in there just with the name. So you don't put it in there with double curlies or anything like that. It's sort of a special parameter sent to the directive that maps directly. So, and then what you see, how we define a controller will have a scope that's passed into it. That's sort of a predefined, and this scope is, we'll talk about in a little bit, but it's the view model part. So there's model, view, view model is the design pattern. So this scope is considered that view model. So it's the glue binding your models and your views. They're communicating that way, but it's inside of a controller. So that's why there's sort of I feel like there's almost a little bit debate or confusion, whatever you want to call it, in AngularJS. So it's a controller. It's called a controller, but the scope really is fitting more of the view model type design pattern. So call it what you will. In the end, it's just how it's functioning and what we're able to do with it that defines its usefulness. So I don't worry about getting caught up on too much subtle differences between design patterns like this. So really, I'm just defining on the scope a toddlers array that's really just key value pairs of 3 different toddlers. So nothing fancy there. This is typical how you represent an object. This is JSON code, JavaScript object notation. So this is just standard JSON. And notice what we get on the right. So we have name, birthday, happy, 3 toddlers in an array. And then when we pop back to the index, we see we're doing this toddler and toddlers. So this toddlers, because it's inside this controller, this toddlers, it's going to look for it on that $scope variable. So we go back here, we have scope.toddlers. That's how it knows what to get there. Back to the index for toddler and toddlers. So that's this ng repeat sort of reads like that for toddler and toddlers, which maybe is something you've seen in other languages. So that creates in this sort of, it's almost like a for each loop, toddler, and then toddler.name, birthday, and happy. And those are the three properties, 3 keys in that JSON object for each. And you can see what we get out here in the HTML. We just get toddler 1, 2, and 3 just in a simple table showing the values of the fields. So pretty simple starting with a JS app. So this is an example of inline templating. So this showing these ng repeats and doing the double curlies here is, and it's all in the body of our document. So this is just considered inline notation or inline templating. And then we're in the script, we're just defining our toddlers just straight up in JavaScript. This is probably typically not how we're going to do it, right? We're going to go get it from the server or get it from some other source. So, but that's why this is the beginner example. So let's hop over and let's move on to the next one. So what is that scope? Like I mentioned, it's the application, it's the view model, the glue between the controller and the view. So this is pretty important, this whole concept of scope, and really it being named scope. That's for a reason. You're probably familiar with hearing the term scope as being the scope of variables or a function scope. So variables inside the function are accessible inside the function but not outside the function type of thing. And same type of meaning here. It was named with a good purpose. So I just have a link here to the AngularJS documentation on scope if you want to read more. There's obviously a lot more to it, but for as far as us getting started, we're not going to talk too much about some of the finer points yet. So let's start off by looking at models. So what are the different types of data sources that we can have to define our models? And we can use JSON in the initial page load to pre-populate these services. So this would be like, maybe you have an app and you don't necessarily want to go make a call to the web server before anything loads on your page. Like, you don't want to have to wait for that to get done. So sometimes you might want to include your model definition just inside your initial page load. So we'll show how to do that, and also we'll show how to use a static JSON file to load, and then we'll also show how to use a REST API. And the other one that we sort of already showed was just defining it straight up in the template, which in reality is probably not very common, but these other methods definitely are. So we're going to build on this previous example by creating our models using these different data sources and showing how that works. So the first one we're going to look at is using the JSON data on initial page load. So that's what I'm doing right here. I just have a script tag. So really I'm just extending on the same example that I used before, but we're just going to generate things in a little different way. So you can see over on the right here, I'm going to be showing the same thing, but showing it using these different types of methods of getting the data. So first, JSON from the initial page load. I just have in a JavaScript, in a script tag in the header, I just have a window.toddlers equals that same code that we had in the previous example. So instead of really embedding it in the controller, making it sort of a global variable, and then how I load that in the script. And there's a lot of other stuff in here that we'll talk about, but I'm just going to jump down to the controller part. So I've named this person controller now, but what we're going to do is we are going to define it's one of the other Angular functions here. It's a factory. So what we're gonna do is we're creating a toddler service using the ng resource. So when we have prerequisites that we need to use inside of our function, we pass it along in the function arguments, and because we have a dependency on this ng resource now, we include it in the array, which is a change from what we had before. We just had Angular module my app and we had blank, but we put ng resource in there now, and that allows us to bring in that, and it's just sort of, it instantiates that, and it's known as this $resource, and it can be used by different functions and different objects within the application. So what we're doing is we're creating a toddler service, and we're returning this resource object, which has some nice methods on it, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But so what we're doing, what that toddler really represents is it's a service, but it also can be initialized with a JSON, an array of JSON objects, so some JSON. So all we're doing down here is saying, using an Angular for each for that Windows toddlers variable, and we have a callback where each of those the individual toddlers will be passed to this function, and then we're storing it on the scope toddlers, a lot like we were in the previous example, and it's an array, so we're going to push onto the array a new toddler with that JSON sent to the constructor so that we get out a toddler object. So what that then gives us is an actual toddler object that we can use, but really when we're looking at that, it just initializes it, and it's going to make that have properties that are the same properties that we have. So I mean, this format is probably more, maybe starting to get more familiar to you from maybe server-side design, or where you have a constructor, do a new and a type of object, or toddler would be like a class, and then you pass it the initial arguments for the class, and you pass them in the constructor. So similar type of thing. So all we're doing there, we're just loading it up the same way we did before. And if we go back, we find that part, the toddler is using JSON from initial page load, and really this looks exactly the same that we had before. We didn't change any of our inline templating, and you can see we got the same result over here too. So the next one we're going to look at is getting JSON from a static JSON file. So this next example, so we're in the controller, down to the next one, we're going to do scope.teens equals teen.query. So let's go up to that teen service. So it's just called teen, and same type of thing, resource, and we're initializing that resource with a teens.json file. So that teens.json file is over here on the left. We go into Plunker, on their list of files on the left. I'm going to click on that, and same type of thing. I mean, this code all looks familiar. It's an array of objects with keys and values, just called teens because we're showing teens in this one. So one of the things that the resource provides is a .query method, and the query method just returns all of the objects that are in it. So think of this like this resource is really for a REST API, so it's really designed to be able to hit the server and go. And so if you just issue a straight up like a select all, select star from wherever on your server, this is what this teen.query brings back, and it brings back an array of objects, and those objects are the ones that we have in that teens.json file that we initialize up here. So if I go to the index.html, go down to the teens part of it, you can see this is just the same. This is pretty much the same thing. Just teen in teens, and then teen name, birthday, and happy. And you can see on the right we have the same type of output. So nothing really changed here. So I mean, this is nice, right? Because we're not really changing much on for the view side of it, for that template, but we're changing the underlying method of getting the data, which is really I'm sure if you've done server-side stuff, the MVC, you're trying to separate your view and your model. The view shows the model, but it's not dependent on anything else. It's isolated. The model can be created however it wants, as long as it has the same type of properties on it. We can display it. So it's independent of the method of filling it, or whatever is modified, anything. So the next thing we're going to look at is going to be using a REST API. So I'm kind of cheating a little bit because I'm not really using a REST API, but there's some ways that we can sort of I guess show a REST API like functionality within Plunker here. So what we have down here, the next part in the controller, is scope.adult equals adult.query. So nothing really different there. It looks the same type of thing like we did with the one above with teen.query. But when I look above, we're going to define our factory pretty similar. myapp.factoryAdult, pass the resource in. Then we're going to do something a little bit different this time. We're going to define this sort of path to say, so above we did teens.json, that's just a static JSON file, but down here we're going to say adults / and then this here is a placeholder, this adult ID with a colon in front of it, and .json at the end, and we say adult ID, which matches this parameter over here, equals this AID. So what this expression here is saying, when you get the data back from the server, if there's a property named AID, which think of in this case, AID represents sort of the adult ID. Think of like the object ID from the server, like maybe if you store that data in a MySQL table, you had your key, your primary key on that table might be AID. And so you fetch it back, and you have adult ID equals AID from the data. And that's important, this mapping here, because it also automatically enables a lot of the saving from the REST API. You can do a save and it will know that AID is your ID. So when it sends it, it'll know what URL endpoint to hit because it has this mapping of adult ID to AID from the data. So really this adult ID is just kind of a completely arbitrary parameter. You can name it whatever you want, but here is the mapping from that arbitrary name to the actual property on the data. So what we're going to do is we got this query. So just like we expect, it's going to grab everything. So what happens when you do a query and there's you're not sending an adult ID parameter or anything with it, you're just saying get everything. What it does, it automatically collapses this down and it's going to call adults.json. So this whole part here is removed because you didn't send any adult ID with it. So that's how we're sort of, we're not really hitting a REST API. It's just going to hit this local JSON file. But the example is still the same. You could just as easily implement adults.json on a server. And if the server returned that, it would do the same thing. So adults.json, so if we go up on the left, list of files, our adults.json is a lot of the same stuff that we had before, except you see the one thing that's added in is our AID field. So that's going to be that object ID to help us with saving and retrieving individual records by their sort of primary key ID type of thing. So so as you see, so that's going to return everything, and as you see, we have on the right using a REST API returning all adults, and then that same example. So really here, nothing changed here either. So adult and adults, just the using adults instead of teens or toddlers changed. So name, birthday, happy. So if we go over here, let's do an example of fetching a single adult. So this would be just like you have a REST API. The query is just doing like an adults.json. So adults / just like you'd do on your server. Like I expect to get all of the adults. So we're going to do in a single adult. So we're going to get a single one. So we're going to do single adult equals adult.get, and then we're going to pass these parameters. And this adult ID, remember, this is that same identifier up here. So adult ID is 1. So we want to get the object that has the ID 1. So when there is a parameter set up in this URL, it's going to insert that number 1 up into that adult ID parameter in like a replacement sort of thing. So really what it ends up being is adults/1.json. So conveniently I can just sort of make that in Plunker up on the left, adults/1.json. That's sort of emulating my REST API response. And here's my response. I have adult 1, birthday, happy. It's just a single JSON object, and that's all I have. Just bring that single one back. So it's not an array anymore. It's just this is just like the response we would expect to get. We might expect to have an AID parameter in there though too. So we can always add that in. So same type of thing. So in our script, we just save that to the single adult scope object. So if we go to our index, go down here, we just have, we changed our markup a little bit. We just say single adult.name, birthday, happy. And as you can see over on the right here, just shows that one adult. So in summary, we're showing different methods of pulling. We have the JSON from the initial page load. We have from a static JSON file, and we have a REST API. And then of course we have that first example that we had shown earlier that you could just define it right in your controller and use it that way too. So let's go back to the presentation. So templating methods. So there are what we've shown so far is inline HTML as our templating method. Directives plus AngularJS allow you to create custom HTML markup, both elements and attributes. So what we're going to show is we've seen inline HTML. We can define within JavaScript. Directly just straight up in JavaScript you can just write out HTML, which is obviously something that was the reason that we moved to some of these frameworks, is we don't want to always be writing JavaScript within HTML or writing HTML within JavaScript, because that can get pretty messy, trying to escape quotes and double quotes and all kinds of stuff. But sometimes for performance reasons, you want it just directly defined in JavaScript. And if it's small, maybe that isn't too bad of a model, especially if you don't want the overhead of having your templates everywhere. So a third method is you can include your template within a script tag and then load it that way, or you can include it in an external HTML file that you might fetch from the server. So all of these methods can easily be used, in a single project. It's not like you got to pick one over the other. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our existing code. We're just going to stick with using the local JSON file as a data source, and I'm going to show you these different templating methods all together so we can compare them. Alright, so we have our inline template here. Same, this is nothing new. This is what we've been using all along. And then what we're going to do here's the markup for a JavaScript defined template. So this is some new syntax, so we'll go over it. So ng repeat teen and teens, that's something we've seen. But then I'm throwing this teen-JavaScript in there, and then I have teen equals teen. So what this is called is a directive. So your teen-JavaScript is the name of a directive that we'll see in the code, and really that's just on there as an attribute. That's an attribute just like, maybe if you had a checkbox, you'd say checked, or if you had a so this is just sort of in there. It might look a little bit weird, and that's also something that we'll address later on in the presentation, how it seems a little weird to just sort of be tossing your own defined attributes on an element. But notice we still keep it. It's on the tr tag. We just toss that, and then we're saying teen equals teen. And what this is think of this as an argument to that directive. So we're saying teen equals teen. So this teen maps to this one. So this, in the ng repeat, this is an object, and we're passing it as like a function, like an argument to a function. I think that's the easiest way to kind of think of it. And internally, and then this is the name of it. So let's go look at that JavaScript before it gets too crazy. So we're going to look for this teen-JavaScript directive. So here it is. You do myapp.directive teen JavaScript, and notice that name doesn't really match the other one. And this is sort of a conversion that's automatically done by AngularJS. So you always name these in camel case, where words are, well, they don't have to be in camel case. I mean, you could have it all lowercase if you wanted. But when you have something like this, it's going to automatically take places where it sees a capital letter. It's going to convert it to lowercase and add a dash. So teen-JavaScript in the HTML matches this teen JavaScript all one word camel case. So that's kind of a convention to kind of get used to. It's not something that you really see too often unless you're familiar with maybe some server-side MVC frameworks and stuff like that. So so this sort of is just a naming convention to make our job easy. So when we define a directive, we have several. This is just returning an object that has several sort of specific properties that mean something to a directive. So there's the restrict parameter, that there's these letters in there, and each letter is a code to say, so A stands for attribute, E stands for element, and there's a couple other restrictions called, you can have C for comments and C for class and M for comments. So you can put these in there in one of several ways. Right now we're using the attribute because we're just adding it to that TR element as an attribute. And then each directive has its own scope. It can choose to not do its own scope variable in here, which means it'll look at all variables that you have on your containing scope. But we can also, by defining our scope in here, we're isolating the scope. So we're sort of creating that function signature type of thing. I like to think of it like that. So we're saying scope, and the teen parameter is the name of the parameter, and it's this equal sign just means that that is the same name of the argument in the DOM attached to that element. So that means that teen is what we expect to see. Teen is what we expect to see here, and it's also going to be what that is referred to as inside the function. So it doesn't have to be. I mean, you could, just like a function can choose whatever internal variable that it wants to use, but the external is the interface that you use. So and then this is showing a JavaScript defined template. So we can just do template and just have some some HTML that we're defining right here. So, and because we referring to this as teen.name, teen.birthday, teen.happy. And this is the same code we've been seeing, just in a little bit different form. So alright, so that's showing how to do a JavaScript based template. So what that's going to do when it sees this for teen and teens, and then it's going to call this directive. We have 3 teens, so it's going to call that directive 3 times, and each time passing it in the individual teens. So you could think of this as starting the loop, and then because the loop was started here, it's going to repeat this whole thing over, and it's going to call these. So for every one, right over here in the teens using JavaScript defined template, it just outputs all 3. So the next method, we're going to look at a script defined template. So notice, so here's that section down here. It looks very similar. We're just calling this directive teen-internal and teen equals teen. Let's go to the code. See what this looks like. So we got teen internal. So it pretty much looks exactly the same as what we had above in the teen JavaScript one, except for instead of a template, we have a template URL, and we say teen-internal.html. So, but if I look over here in my list of files in Plunker, I don't have a teen-internal.html. So where in the world is that coming from? Well, what you can do is, it's an awfully, I think it's a great idea that was included in this template. So remember, this is called teen-internal.html. There's a thing that AngularJS implements called a template cache. So in a script tag that has type text ng template, I can use an ID of teen-internal.html. So when you have that template URL, it first looks in the template cache, which is loaded using this method, using these script tags within your head. So it will first, before it goes and fetches it from the server, it will look to see if there's any script tags with this type that have this teen-internal.html ID. If it finds it, it'll just grab it. That way it doesn't have to fetch the server. If it's not there, then it's going to try and fetch it from the server. And you're assuming that you have that on the server if you define it, right? But so this template just has what each row should look like. And this is all the same type of markup that we had before too. So really we're just sort of showing all the differences, taking the same markup and putting it in different spots to achieve the same result. So that's where it's grabbing it from. So that now we can just jump right into the next one using an external HTML file. So as you can probably guess, this looks the same. We just call it different, called teen external. Teen equals teen, all the same as we've done for these last three templating methods. If we go into the JavaScript, teen external, restrict, scope, all the same stuff. Template URL now is teen-external.html. If we look in our index, I don't have any script tag for that teen-external, so it's going to go and fetch it from the server, which over here we see teen-external.html. And that, of course, those contents are exactly the same as what this template cache is in the index.html for the internal one. So what this is, if you can probably guess sort of what this allows you to do is, I mean, you can fine-tune your performance. If you are fetching something from the server and decide you don't want to, well, you can just bring that same HTML file and just load it right into a script tag in your template cache, and then you have one less resource that you're bringing in. If you need even further performance, you could take that and you could just flatten it out into your JavaScript defined template. If you don't need any of that flexibility and you don't need the speed or anything, you can just define it using the inline template. That way, maybe it's easier to read in whatever circumstance. So in summary, we have inline template, we have JavaScript defined template, we have script tag defined template, and that's that template cache, and then we have an external HTML file. So those are sort of the main templating methods. So let's pop back to the presentation. So one of the totally killer features of AngularJS is two-way data binding. So this is something that some of the other frameworks don't really do great, or you need a plugin to do, but this is at the core of AngularJS, which I think is really key to why AngularJS is popular and why it is being seen by, you look at that integrating into your web app, that you can really create some code that is, you don't have to really write a lot to have it do a lot, which is something that you really want a framework to do for you. So what two-way data binding allows us to do is we can take a variable that's in our scope, that $scope variable, and we can bind its to an element or an input, so that that element or that input will show the value of that variable. And so that's the one-way part. And then the two-way is, so the second way is we should have that input element, if it's changed, it modifies that variable immediately within the scope without us having to do, jump through a bunch of hoops to do it. So, and we can also use that scope variable to control which CSS class gets applied to an element and a lot of other stuff. So that's the two-way. So we have the element will display the variable that's on the scope in JavaScript directly, and when you change that, an element or an input, if you change its contents, then it should also change the data. So those two are always in sync. So something on the model changes, maybe you have an input and you have some other element that changes it, but you want that input to also show, so it could be changed by multiple sources, but because of that two-way binding, it'll always show its current value. So let's take a look at this. It's the easiest way. I can explain it all day, but that's what these examples are for. That's why we do stuff instead of just talking about it. So here I'm going to show, off on the left, show you kind of what I'm, in general, sort of like the general functionality I'm looking for. So we're going to have these, so using the same type of example, name, birthday, and happy. I have them in a table, and happy I now want to be a checkbox. And because it's a Boolean, it's just a Boolean value, right? So down here you can see the representation of that JSON as a live view. That it's something that Angular provides. You can just look at JSON and display it in the DOM, in the HTML. So we want to say that, and we want to, and notice that the ones who are happy, the row is colored green, and the ones who are not happy, the row is colored red, the whole row. So if I take and uncheck one, it should go red, and if I check one, it should go green. And notice that while I'm doing this, the JSON down below is changing. So this is showing a live view of that JSON data structure. So it's kind of neat. It's pretty good for debugging if that's a way that you're comfortable with doing. If you don't like using a debugger or something, you can just toss this stuff up in the HTML real quick and just kind of see what's going on. So here's the AngularJS code to do this. So a lot of this is going to look familiar. We're just sort of building on and adding on additional functionality as we go. So hopefully it's like a step-by-step process that's pretty easy to follow. But so we still have the TR tag, the table row, ngRepeat teen and teens, and we still have our teen name birthday. But you can see what we added. We changed the happy, instead of just doing teen.happy, we added an input type checkbox. And then we use this ngModel directive to say it equals teen.happy. So this is when you do an ngModel, that is doing the two-way data binding. So that's saying this checkbox should reflect the state of teen.happy, and teen.happy is a Boolean, so that's how that works. Checkbox is great to represent a Boolean state, an on or an off state. So and that's what we're doing. We have teen happy, and happy is true or false. So that is all we need to allow that checkbox to toggle that state. So really all that does there is it allows the checkbox up here, me checking it on and off, to be bound to this happy variable state. So you'll notice that variable changing as I toggle it on and off. So then the other thing, part of our thing we wanted the row to be green if they're happy and red if they're sad. So there's an ngClass directive that says apply class happy if teen.happy is true, apply class sad if teen.happy is not true. So that's really all we have to do. Let's look at the JavaScript. How much JavaScript do you think it takes to make this? It's kind of sad, actually. There's not very much code to show. I think that's a good thing, though. So we're just doing like we did before. Module, bringing the resource in, created a teen factory, teen service, resource, grabbing it from the teens.json file. That's the same content that we had before. Nothing different about that. Let's take a look. Nothing different about that. But then we have our controller, and all we're doing is doing teens equals teen.query. That's it. There's no other code. All of it is taken care of with a built-in two-way data binding in AngularJS. So I think hopefully this is probably one of the first examples that you have that really shows you what a framework like this can do for you. In my opinion, you write less code, that's a good day. The more code that you write, the harder it is to maintain, the more you have to test. So if you can get the same stuff done in just as an effective way with less code, everybody should be happy. So to kind of prove this point, since if you're looking at AngularJS, it's almost certain you've probably used jQuery quite a bit and designed some pretty good apps. That's probably why you're starting to look at this and trying to figure out, man, should I start doing AngularJS or should I stick with jQuery? So to show this, I decided I should see what it would take to design the same type of thing using jQuery plus Mustache. So Mustache is for those of you that don't know what that is, that's a client-side templating language that you can use in JavaScript. So I wanted to be a fair comparison, so jQuery plus Mustache, because AngularJS has a templating language built into it, so I wanted to combine the two to give as fair a comparison as I could. So let's jump over and let's just take a look at that. So we're just going to build the same exact thing, just build it two ways, and we're going to compare the type of code that we need to do this. So notice I got the same thing that we just had. I click the happy, changes the row state. So here's the same thing with jQuery. Click it, changes the row state. It's initially populated based on what that teens.json file was initially, right? You had the first two were happy and the last one was false, not happy. So we've already seen the jQuery or the AngularJS side of it, right? I haven't changed anything there, just the same code. The jQuery part of it, I'm gonna have to build it a little bit differently. So I just put the table with the first row there, and then I'll look at it here. So let's go to the JavaScript. So here's a reminder of our AngularJS. Pretty small, right? Nothing changed from what we had before. You know, good 18 lines of codes with, and we got a lot of comments in there too. So, you know, whatever you wanna, you know, call it for official lines of code. But let's go over to the jQuery side now. So let's, you know, just review what we got to do here. We have to take our data. We have to render it in a table. We have to make the happy into a checkbox. We have to make the checkbox reflect the initial state of the data that was loaded. We need to make, when the box is checked, we got to have it change the state of the row, change the class on the row. And so let's go take a look at that jQuery code. So, and I also added since we're using mustache, I added a mustache template here to represent our code. So if you're not familiar with mustache, you can probably sort of guess what's going on here. If it's happy, the initial state checked equals, or the checkbox should be true, and if it's not happy, should be not checked. So the checked and not checked is the thing there. So in here, let's kind of go through this. So the first thing we do is we need to compile our mustache template down and save it so we can use it. So I'm going to add a mustache template result div on there. We need to go fetch that data in that teens.json file. So I'm using jQuery, using the get.json. So that calls that and then invokes a callback with the data. We're going to save that data off. We're going to take that template result, that's what I made up here, that div, and we're going to load the mustache teen.html, that's the template, and then doing a callback, grabbing the template. For each teen, we need to render the template for each teen and get the output from it, and then we're going to append the output. So remember, the output of that mustache template is just a row, and then we're going to append it onto the jQuery example section. We're going to append it onto the table, so we're sort of creating one row at a time and appending it onto the end. Okay, so simple enough. That adds the HTML that we need, and then we also got to make sure that initial row class is added appropriately. So remember, you know, green, add the happy class for if they're happy, and a sad class if they're sad. So we're saying for each input in our table, we want to set the row state of it. So created just a helper function that takes an element. Set teen row state takes an element, has the class mapping, grabs the checkbox value, then says, you know, it's the checkbox, so we have to go up to the parent row, take the old class off, and add the new class. So that's setting the initial state. And then we also have to add an event handler so that when that checkbox is checked, that it changes the row state. So we're going to do the same type of thing and on the change of every input, on the checkbox input, that we set that row state again. So notice how you have to be so much more explicit, and you have to do every little thing in jQuery. You know, 48 lines, as opposed to the 18 lines that we had to do in Angular. So hopefully, you know, this is starting to really hit home as to maybe this is some jQuery code that you may have written, you know, and feel free to pick apart my, you know, jQuery code. You know, maybe this isn't the best implementation that you could have come up with, but I think it's close enough that it shows the full features of AngularJS, having the templating broken out and bringing that in and showing how you would have to do that if you wanted to have the same type of environment architecture in your app. So next topic here is filters and formatters. So there are several built-in filters, and they call them filters, but it's really you can do filtering or formatting. That's within your client-side templates. So there's a bunch of built-in like currency, date, JSON, lowercase, number, uppercase. So in here, right here, sort of in line in the code, you see we can format the birthday. We use a little pipe, and then we give the name of the formatter, the filter, sorry, and then pass it a parameter. And then there's also like true, well, what I consider sort of true filters, like limit to and order by. Maybe if you know SQL, that's kind of the same type of thing. Limit to, order by, sort of doing sorting and things like that. So let's take a quick look at how date formatting can be done. So what we're going to do here is we have a pretty simple, this is all the same as before, right? The same code, we got roughly the same output. We just have a birthday in a different format. So I had to change the birthday. So this is the raw JSON right here. I had to change the birthday format a little bit from what I had in the previous ones just to make it so I didn't have to like do any fancy coding and stuff to like the other format that I had given wasn't it wasn't a standard JavaScript date format, but this one is with a year, month, day. So all we really do is we say teen birthday and we pipe and we pass it the date, and we if you go on the AngularJS documentation, you can see a ton of different date formats that can be used to format into whatever. So, and this all makes sense, right? Like this is we don't want to have to change the model, the data coming from the server to reflect how we're going to display it. That's a view thing. We don't want to have to worry about that stuff. We want to make sure that our pieces of software have one thing they do and they do them well. So we don't want to have to worry about that birthday coming out and passing something to the server that says format the date like this, because what if we decide one day we want to allow the customer to choose with a little checkbox or something what date we want. We don't want to have to fetch the data from the server every time. So it's really just thinking about that. That's a view thing, so we keep that on the client side. So going to the script, there's nothing changed. We didn't actually have to add any new JavaScript to this. This is the same code that we've had before. So really, all it is we have a bunch of these filters, and we just use the pipe. So within this double curly, we can just add date. We could change that to currency. We could lowercase everything. We could uppercase everything. So it's pretty nice. And then you can build custom filters, formatters, so you could make it do anything you want. If some of the date formats don't work for you, you could build a custom date format filter and be on your way. And also notice that this down here, kind of what we've been showing, this live view, it's just a JSON filter, JSON formatter. So your teens, you pass it right to the JSON formatter, and it just shows that live output. That's what allows us to be able to see that JSON rendered in HTML and changing as we're changing our stuff, which is a great, for me, it's a great teaching tool here. So, all right, let's pop back to the presentation. So another really great feature with AngularJS is being able to watch a scope variable. So we can monitor a scope variable for changes using $watch. That's a parameter on the controller or on the scope. So we can have, and then we can have it say whenever this variable changes, fire a callback, and then we can do whatever action we need. So think of this as like something you might have done before, using a click or a change event in jQuery. But there's even AngularJS has an ng-click and an ng-change event that allow you to trigger functions that are in AngularJS, or so even using this watch is a lot of times a better pattern to use than using ng-click or ng-change where possible. So, and we'll show some of these too, and I mean, you'll get into them too as you start using AngularJS. It's kind of one of the first things that, even as you go through and you evolve your AngularJS design, you might start and put a lot of ng-clicks and ng-changes in places, but when you start to see the true power of things, you can start to eliminate those and use watches instead, which sort of keeps some of that functionality out of the HTML, because an ng-click is just an attribute that you'd attach to an element, and it pushes it down into your controller, really where it belongs, because you're just watching on the data instead of watching on the element. So a lot of times you can oftentimes replace that, and using the watches are a pretty good way to do it. So let's take a look at what this watch does and how it's called. So we have a modified. We're moving up to adults now because we're getting into some fairly advanced stuff. So the table looks the same like we've had before, right? We got the happy toggle. But I just added this extra enter number of gifts to give field. So just a field, thinking like if somebody is not happy, maybe you could give them a gift and it would make them happy. So really this is just an input box, and all I'm doing and showing in this example is just changing that input. And then we're going to show how to do this watch. So here's that field. I'm saying ng model gift total. And also something I threw in on this one is an ng bind. So ng model is two-way. So when you change something in the input, it changes the variable. ng bind is just one way. So if you have a variable in your scope that you just want to show, it's just a read-only type of thing, you can do an ng bind and do it that way. So that's why you see whenever I change this over here, it changes the field right below it. So if we go in JavaScript, we have that new gift total variable that's bound. Remember, this is just the initial, so it's not showing the current state. And then we're going to do this watch. So we're going to say scope.$watch gift total, and that's of course mapping to this. And then it calls a callback, and we actually get the new value and the old value there to be able to do whatever type of logic that we want. So, and this is sort of a little kind of a gotcha about these watches, is that on the initial registration of this watch, you will get the watch will be triggered, but it's triggered with both new and old value equal. So you can use that to maybe do any one-time, first-time initialization. But for the most part, when I'm writing watches and stuff, I'm almost all the time, I'm just, I don't want to do anything on that initial. It's sort of just a product of getting it in there. And what we're doing is we're saying, let's log the new value and log the old value. So let's pull open our console, and let's change 5, 6, 7. So notice that we're logging to the console. Might be hard to see on the video, but new value, old value, new value, old value. So you have access to the old and the new. So there's a lot of things that you could end up doing with this. Like maybe somebody changes something and it ends up exceeding a certain limit. So you take the old value and you might say the max value was the old value or whatever. So it's a lot of times pretty useful to know what the previous state was and what the new state going to. So so you can watch on a variable. Another thing that you can also do is you can watch on an entire object and see if any of the properties of the object changed. So if you just went and I had an object like adults, and I put a watch on adults, it wouldn't really do maybe what you think it would. It wouldn't tell you every time something changed unless you add an extra true parameter at the end of the watch, and then it will watch the whole object, and any parameter that it changes, it will let you know, and then it'll send you like the old object and the new object. And then there's another function that's it's called watch collection. We're not going to go over it, but I just wanted to mention it, that you can actually use that to watch an array, and if anything is added or deleted from the array, you can call your callback, and you'll get the elements that have changed and stuff. So it's pretty interesting. So I mean, if you think about this, you could use this to drive all kinds of functionality. You know, every time the gift total changed, you want to increase everybody's happy to true. So you could probably do that. So there's a lot of circumstances, and this is, you know, you're binding right to the core model of the data. So everything else, if it's all bound correctly, you know, that parameter, that gift total variable, always represents what its true state is. Everything else changes that. So you have sort of that model is a source of truth. That's why use that terminology. The model is the source of truth for all the data. All the data, if it doesn't exist in the model, it hasn't changed. It should be all bound together, nice and tight. You don't have to write, you know, a bunch of functions to update one from the other, and not really sure if your underlying data represents the true state of your view, you know, of that variable within the view. So you always have that model. You just make sure the model's up to date, and you're all good. That's all right. Presentation. So client-side routing. So this is another big feature of you know, single-page apps, modern web design, modern web app architecture. So you know, with us having a single-page app, fetching data from a REST API or a server, and then coming through and changing the page, but not doing a reload, right? We're just using Ajax. So there's built-in routing within AngularJS to allow you to use. So I guess I should mention, just to clarify that. So like single page apps, it's typically you have the hash sign, and then you have a path after that. So that path represents your navigation within the single page app. So where if you would do a full reload, you wouldn't have it after the hash, you'd have it before the hash, like, you know, your app /adults/adult/edit. And those would be separate pages, but really what this is, it's a single page app, but you still can use that navigation by using the hashtag. And so this is great for doing permalinking, so like where you could just copy the address from the address bar and send it to somebody, and that would bring that person to the exact same state. Because that's a drawback of having the single page apps. If you don't use it, you know, you go to a single page app, you click on 4 things, and you want to show someone else what you're viewing on the screen. You want to send them a URL so they can see the thing. If you're not changing the address in the address bar, then it's going to be impossible to really send someone to that particular view that you had to click on 4 things to get. So that permalinking thing, that also goes along with browser history. So if every time someone switches a significant part of your single page app, like they switch a view, they you know, do some operation to view something in detail from a list or whatever, you know, you add that to that hashtag routing, and then if you hit the back button, you know what it's going to do. It's not going to have to be something you're going to have to track in code, like, you know, every action you keep in an array, and then, you know, when they hit back, you go pop off the array and do something like that. So you don't really do that in this case. It's you can do that browser history, and it just works with the navigation up in the address bar. So there's a ng route module, which actually is with a version of AngularJS that just came out, it's actually a separate module that you bring in, a lot like ng resource. So it's not part of core, but it's part of the, you know, it's just not part of the core AngularJS.js file or Angular.js file. It's part of the it's a different file that you would just bring into your app, which is good. I mean, the more componentized that you can get your JavaScript frameworks, the less overhead that you need for bringing any one thing in. Because if you don't use routing, you don't want to have to include that code and all the overhead that goes with it of being, you know, creating all the objects and things. So So this client-side routing and how it's implemented is probably most similar to a front controller design pattern that you might use server-side with MVC design, where you're detecting a path and then routing it to appropriate controller and any other templates that go along with it. So let's take a look at single-page routing and how it can be done. This isn't exactly the easiest thing to use in Plunker because of some oddities about how to use like a back button in this iframe and stuff, but we'll show it. So here's the end product. I am listing my 3 adults, and I have each of them as a link. And if you can see the link down below, you probably might not be able to, but it's going to be, so right now this page is at #/adults, and when I click on one of these, it should go #/adults/1. So think of it this, if you know REST APIs, that's the same type of notation that you use. If you just do /adults, you expect to get all adults, and if you do /adults/an ID, you expect to get one of them. So we're going to click on this, and you get a detail view that's just of a single adult and what they are. So I can go back, can view adult 2, go back, view adult 3. So call this the list view and call this the detail view. So let's look at how we implement this. So this is kind of markup is kind of boring. It's just div ngView. That's because we have some the stuff and the operations of it are in JavaScript. So let's go to JavaScript and see what's going on. So we have the app, and we include this ng route in the dependency list of our app. And then we're going to add a config to our app, and it's going to bring the route provider, which is provided by this ng route module. So you can see this is probably something you can kind of understand what it's doing. When /adults, use this particular template with this controller. When /adults/an ID, and remember this is the same convention that we used before, this adult ID, and that's like the ID of the object, and then template URL, the detail HTML, and then a different controller, so you can be routing different paths to different controllers. And then just a default, if some unknown path is in there, let's go somewhere else. So all this stuff is the same that we had from our previous adult implementation. It's a ng resource, it's a REST API resource, adult id.json, and then the AID is that object identifier. The person controller, which is just the list view, just says adults, I want all adults. Grab them all and then display them using the template. The detail controller, so remember, go back up. With adults, we use regular person controller, but with adult/an ID, we use person detail controller. So person detail controller, in the injection, we're getting scope and route params, and then our service. So route params is how we are going to get that adult ID parameter. So route params.adult ID is that right here. We have a little placeholder type of thing to give it a name. So .adult ID, and we're saving it off here. We're not doing much with it, but really here is what's happening. So scope.adult equals adult.get. So remember, this is the REST API. We want to get, and we want to send AID equals that adult ID. So what that does is that when we click on this thing over here, it is doing a fetch of that using that AID that we passed. And remember, this view is going to be /adults #/adults/1. So it's going to give us that first adult. And how I did that here, same adults JSON. and I have to over on the left here, I have adults/1/2/3 to kind of show how that would be, the sample responses that you might get from a REST API. And then so for the list template, adult-list.html, adult and adults, make a link that's /adults/ the object ID for that person. And then adult detail is just a lot like what we've had before. And then I added the back to make it easy, #/adults, and that goes back to the list view. So, all right, that's about it with that. Let's go back to the presentation here. So, other notable directives, we have the AngularJS, of course, is full documentation there, tons of stuff. There's an ng show and ng hide, similar to jQuery show and hide, that allows you to bind to something on your scope. And there's ng include, ng if, ng switch to allow you switching out templates and manipulate the HTML based on a condition that, based on a model that's in your scope on your controller. So there's lots of stuff. Like there's no way I can cover them all in this just this single presentation. But there's tons to look through, and I think you'll probably be pleasantly excited when you go through and you see what kind of stuff that AngularJS is going to make you capable of doing. So I wanted to actually show a little bit more about REST API, since it's such a big part of modern web design. Really, in evaluating and seeing and understanding what a JavaScript framework is going to do for you, you need to understand and how it's going to interact with the REST API. So one thing that you may have noticed being look a little fishy, look a little silly, something maybe doesn't make sense, is that we have this scope.adults equals adult.query. And we know, if that's a REST API, that's an AJAX call, right? Even though I've been doing the stuff where I've been using a JSON file within Plunker to pull them, it's an asynchronous call. So, but it kind of looks weird because we're doing something that looks like a synchronous assignment of that adults variable, but it's not. It's actually just appears to be synchronous like that. So what happens is how this is implemented. When you call query, it returns an empty object, and when the AJAX response returns from that REST API, it fills in that object, that empty object. So you write it and it appears synchronous, but it's not really. I mean, it's going to fill it in. It's not going to be immediate. That adults is going to be ready when you're ready for it. But so how this all ties together is that you're probably wondering, well then how do the views even work? If you're assigning it there, how this all works together is that when you do that ng repeat and you say adult and adults, it waits until that adult is back before it renders itself. So it's already, you could think of it sort of internally doing that watch. It's watching to see when adults changes or when it's defined as something, and then when it is defined, it's going to kick off and actually do the view. So there's a huge benefit to this whole system and having everything. So you don't necessarily, you obviously have to worry about the impact of the asynchronous stuff, but because we've been dealing with this sort of stuff for a while now. We've been doing jQuery apps. We all know how this stuff works. It's starting to become commonplace. So the framework is sort of abstracting a lot of that stuff out, so you don't have to worry about it every single time that you are writing an app. So and the ng resource provides a lot of methods that you'd expect on a REST API type of service, like a get, a query, a remove, delete, save type of thing. So we're going to go through and do an example of doing a save in a Plunker here. So we're doing the same type of view like we had before, but what this is going to do when we change this happy, it's going to issue a call and post to the server that changed. And in fact, you can see down here, it's going to be really small on the video, but it's doing a post, to the JSON file, which obviously isn't a server, so it just gives me an error, 404 not found sort of thing. But it's really just wanted to show the example, not the actual, server side part of it, which I think is something that we can all figure out. So how this actually works is, so we have all the same stuff before. We got the adults, we got the list and the detail controller. So we're just going to jump down. We have the same adult service that we had before. Nothing's really different about that. Same definition. What we're going to do is we got the same person controller. Just get all the adults, and the detail controller is where we're adding the additional functionality. So we have a same thing from before. Get that single adult, but then we have this additional method called save adult that takes an adult object as a parameter and then calls save on it. So it's sort of like it's almost like I don't know, think of it like sort of active record type of thing, where you got the object call, it has a save method right on it that saves itself to the database. And then let's just take a look at the detail, because there's one little change in the detail. So I just do a ng change, keep it simple, an ng change. So whenever that checkbox is changed, we're going to save the adult. So and remember, it's already bound to happy, so it's going to bind to happy and then call that change off, and it's going to save it. There's other ways to do it. You could do a watch or something on that adult and then save it when it changed. But I think we went over to watches already. Wanted to show sort of how these changes and clicks and some of the other attributes can be used. So if I said that was it, would you think I was joking? It actually is. That's it. No more code. So adult.save, because this is an ng resource. It's designed for REST APIs. We know that REST APIs that are designed to they're predictable if they're implemented correctly, which if it's a REST API, if it can call itself a REST API, it should be implemented like this. We know that when we do a save, it's going to save to the server using adult / the ID of the object, and it's going to post. So because if the REST API is implemented correctly, that should all work. So it's kind of nice that the REST API is sort of, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a total formal spec, but it's, you can find the correct way that you're supposed to implement a REST API for its basic functionality, the create, you read, update, delete type stuff. So yeah, so that's it. So you do save, and it's going to kick it off. You change it again, it's going to hit the save, and it's gonna post it to the server with that URL, and it's gonna encode the object with JSON. So if I go and look up down here in Firebug, I posted to that adult/1.json, and it posted the JSON that we expected. So it's a JSON. So for a JSON-based REST API, this is what it expects. So post the ID, the name, the birthday, the happy is false. Yeah, so that's really it. So it's pretty slick. So moving on. So how does this watch thing? It's kind of the core of the framework. Like the watch itself, though, is not something that's a miraculous thing. I mean, it's something that we've known, called the observer design pattern. We probably could have been implementing our jQuery code like this too. Just because you're using a new framework, doesn't mean that you couldn't use sort of these same techniques and go back to a jQuery app. So I feel like it's also useful just to understand how some of these frameworks work and how they're accomplishing what they're doing, because it can make all your software design better. So even if you end up not being able to design this into an app, you could definitely use a lot of the concepts to improve jQuery, old jQuery apps or old JavaScript apps, or even just these general design patterns are good to see in action. So this whole watch process, it goes along with the $digest and $apply. Digest and apply. It's part of the digest cycle is what you'll hear as the terminology. So when a variable changes, if things in your scope are bound to, through ngModel, they are automatically added onto this list of stuff that is going to be watched. So that's why you don't have to manually watch everything. Some things are automatically watched through some of those other custom directives. So think of when you do an ngModel, it automatically attaches a watch to it. So when you have all those things, every time the digest cycle runs, it looks at all those variables. So if you can imagine how this is actually implemented, those variables are saved. So anything that you have that's watched or bound is a big list of stuff that every time something changes, it has to go look through and see. So you have the value saved. And remember that when we did that watch, we got the old value and the new value. So it starts to make a little bit of sense that it must be saving it somewhere. So it has, a list of all the variables, and it's looking through them every time. And then if it finds that one of them changed, then go call that, call a callback to whatever we configured, and then send the old value and the new value there. So that's all part of that digest cycle. And what's really interesting is that if you could interoperate with AngularJS, like you can have other jQuery things or whatever, you could go dive in and change a variable, and all you have to do, for the most part, for simple things, all you have to do is really call apply on your to hook back into the AngularJS system to allow your apps to maybe there's some portion of it that you can't, there's nothing that you can find to design it really easy in AngularJS, but you find a jQuery plugin or something that is gonna be awesome and save you a ton of time. So you can go in there and hook in that way. So and this is usually where you first find out kind of internal workings of AngularJS, because you end up encountering this stuff when you're doing custom directives. So what I wanted to do is go through creating a custom directive. So what we're going to do is a pretty common use case. Like we're going to make a ng-enter directive. So something that takes an input box and makes it so that when we hit the enter on the keyboard, that it saves that value. So a typical, submitting a form, you don't want someone to have to like fill in all the values and then go down to the bottom and hit a save button or a submit button. You want, when they fill it in and they hit enter, you want that to automatically take place. So let's take a look at how that can be done. And this is actually an example from an app that I'm making. So I kind of pulled it from there to show. So the desired functionality that I'm trying for is I want to, before when we changed the numbers on this gift total field, it would automatically change the display below. But I want to change it now so I can change it, but then only when I hit enter does it change. So let me type 33 and hit enter. So that's the functionality that we're looking for. So here's how we do it. So all I did to change, the HTML is the same as in our previous example, but I'm saying ng-enter equals gift total. So I'm saying this is my custom thing. Even though it's named ng, it's probably bad practice on my end. You really shouldn't name your own stuff ng, because they could potentially someday add their own ng enter. But for this, whatever, doesn't matter too much. And then I give it the variable that I want to save it to when I hit enter. And then this part's the same, just bind to the gift total to display it. So let's take a look at this sucker. So here's how we're making the directive. So we use a directive function method call, and we give it a name. And remember that funky sort of naming thing, right? Like the camel case, and then it takes the capital, changes it to a lower, and adds a dash. So that's why we call it ng-enter here. but in the code it is ng-enter. So we have a function, and then if you look at the AngularJS documentation, it will sort of show you, this is just sort of the function signature that you get that you need to implement to create a directive. Scope, element, and attributes. So scope is your variable that you have, your scope, just kind of like we've been talking about scope so far. Element is the actual element it's attached to, and then attributes are anything else that that was passed. So when I do something like I said ng-enter equals gift total, when I'm in here, adders.ng-enter equals what I passed to it. When I say ng-enter equals gift total, so adders.ng-enter is going to be gift total, that string. So what I'm saying here, so I got the element, I'm saying element bind to key down and key press, and I probably could have done something here like something different maybe, but figured I'd just do key down or key press, and then I got the event, and then if you're familiar with how you would have done detecting the enter key, this won't look like just totally arbitrary magic to you. This is just saying that the 13 is the enter key. So don't get caught up on that. But so basically on key down or key press, if it was the enter key, take our scope and apply, and then we're going to have a function that defines the stuff that we want to do. So scope.adders enter. So this is actually referring to our controller scope, and take that adders.enter. So on scope we have that gift total variable, remember? So then we're saying that and take the element's value. So that's it. Just like, and this is just sort of jQuery stuff, right? So element dot val, that's the input element's value. So take our scope dot gift total equal to the number 33 or whatever, and then we do this event prevent default. That's just kind of that's just JavaScript stuff to say I'm doing what I want to with the element. Don't do whatever default action that you have when someone presses a button. So yeah, so that's really it. So now you have this packaged up as a nice portable directive that you can attach to anything. If you want to attach it to another element, just say ng-enter and then give it something else. So, all right. So directive best practices. I won't spend a ton of time on this, but you kind of have a lot of choices to consider. We haven't shown a lot of using an element as a directive. That's like instead of a div, you might use something that's called like toddler, and that would show the view, render the template and hook it up. I tend to use attributes more often because I feel like it's a little weird to use elements sometimes, but there are certain cases that using an element is just great, like when it's a sort of self-contained thing. But attributes are a lot, I think, are easier to sort of understand because I still like looking at HTML divs and other markup and stuff. And that all comes down to using proper HTML5 or XHTML5 markup. If one of your projects that you're working on, you were required to have it valid HTML5, well, put in an element named toddler, that's not valid, right? So or doing even putting a like the an ng-enter attribute, that's not valid either. You can't just attach arbitrary attributes unless there's something in HTML5 that allows us to do that, which there is, and we'll discuss in a sec here. And then also you got to think about your scope of your directives. Whether you use that when we define the scope and we sort of create that function signature type of thing that we looked at. You can do that, or you can just have it say it's just going to grab something off a global. There's a few other options too, but if you use that scope and create the function signature, it becomes a lot more reusable. So I have a blog post on like my crazy detailed, kind of going into a lot of this stuff. So I'll leave that for you to read about, but we're just going to talk about some of the basics. So there's a lot of different forms that are sort of automatically looked at for directives. So you don't have to really do anything. They're just sort of there to let you do it. So when you create a directive, you can have it be an element or an attribute, or it can be in a comment, or it can be in a class. So if you think about that restrict parameter that was on the directive, there was an A, there was an E, there was a C, and there was an M. I didn't show the C and M, but mention them. A for attribute, E for element, C for class, M for comment. So you can restrict it to say, okay, this directive can only be an attribute, or this directive can only be an element. So just depending on how, if you just want to leave it open for anybody to use however they want, just make it, no restrictions. But sometimes, for maybe coding practices or whatever, you might want to make certain things restricted to an attribute or something. But that still doesn't make it valid HTML. I mean, I guess the comment would be, or the class, but because those aren't really, there's not much that's restricted in forms of what you can put in comments and stuff. But so that doesn't really make it HTML5 per se. But you can still use attributes. So one thing that maybe is not as well known and kind of a thing about HTML5 is that if you have an attribute named data dash, it's considered by HTML as a custom attribute. You can do whatever in the heck you want with it. It won't be, it's not going to flag in a parser like a validator type thing. It's just allowed to do what you want. So if you really need to validate, you can. So that's really the my point with all this is if you need validation, you can make it validate. But these are all the different forms. You can do nd dash bind, ng colon bind, so ng underscore. So you can do all these different things. Part of it's going to be style. Part of it's going to be that fact if you need it to validate. So it's really, they're not AngularJS isn't going to choose for you. It's going to give you a lot of options and you can whittle down those choices yourself. So what I haven't covered, and I'm not going to cover in this presentation, there's form validation. A lot of tools to be able to do that. Instead of using the ng resource, which is for REST APIs, you can just use HTTP. They have like kind of like similar to what jQuery does for Ajax and Get. You can use that for lower level HTTP control if it's not a REST API and you're just hitting stuff and you're getting some data back or whatever. So that sort of, ng resource honestly is built on top of HTTP. But I also felt like that was appropriate for this beginner talk because one of the reasons that most people are going to probably move to AngularJS is if they're using a REST API. Really simplifies things. So there's also another library called Rectangular that is kind of like a step above, adding a lot of things to ng resource even. That's not included in AngularJS. It's just like it's an external library. Something to look at. So writing tests and how the injector works. So I'm not going to cover that. But it's honestly crucial to being a big benefit of the framework. So as you saw in probably a lot of our controller function definitions, we sort of had some variables that we would pass in, like the scope and the $route provider, and we pass in the services that we were using. That's part of the framework, how everything works, which it's not going to test itself, but it's test ready. If you design it like that, the way it's all built, it's going to be ready for testing, which is really key depending on how important in your company or your project that having good tests are. In animations, there's AngularJS animations, and yeah, there's so much more. You just got to look out at the AngularJS docs to see what's going on, what kind of other things you can do. So all right, so now the real important question. So, okay, we know how to do stuff now, but that's not the only thing that we have to consider when we're bringing a framework into our project. I mean, there's a lot more things than that. So why should we integrate this into our web application? Really, AngularJS encourages good web app front-end design practices, which is something you should always expect a framework to do. Like, you should expect that You shouldn't expect that you use a framework and you just have to write all this spaghetti code to get everything to work the way you want. The framework should be in place so that things are easy and come naturally for you to design the good way versus a bad way. So making a better design shouldn't be too much more hard to do than making a bad design. Otherwise, you're always going to have that, oh, well, I'll just get it done quick, I'm going to do it bad. But so really, AngularJS, it starts you off and gets you going on the path to good design practices just by following the natural practices of the framework. So one of those being model as a source of truth. So having your data, your underlying JavaScript data as the source of truth for your views reflect that data. Other models might be dependent on other models, but in the end, that model is the true data, and everything else grows upon that. Another one is using classes for style, not functionality. I mean, how many times in other projects have you if you have a team that has like a developer and a designer, the designer needs to go in and going to add a class on something, change how something looks, remove a class, add a new class, and then all of a sudden they remove a class and something stops working. Like that's just silly, right? You shouldn't have to worry about that. So having a good practice of using classes for style and not for functionality allows you to have a little more clear separation and less chance for someone to screw up what someone else is doing. You got the front end dev and you got a front end designer working on the same stuff at the same time. So keep classes for style and then keep all the other stuff in code. The dependency injection is really core to the framework that allows you to have code that's ready to test. And that's all that function signature and passing stuff like your service is in. You need to go test that controller. You can just pass in a mock of that service that maybe just returns some local data instead of hitting the server, and then you can make sure it can handle all the different cases. So it's good to have a framework that has that stuff built in. Is one of the first ones I've seen. So using client-side objects that are similar to server-side objects, what kind of pain in the butt is it to, on your server you have an object, and on your server you call it a toddler object. Why don't you have the same thing on your client side? Have an object, it's called a toddler object, has a lot of the same methods. If you have to develop the stuff, if you have to start sharing and saying, a front-end dev maybe has to go and do back-end dev stuff. Maybe you're not always as big a team that you have people who can just focus on one thing, and you got people working on both. Well, if you use the same terminology, use the same type of objects, have the same types of methods, if you have to duplicate it, why not make them the same and make it so that you can share that knowledge? That a toddler on the server is going to have a name, a birthday, and a happy state. Well, you better on the client side should have the same thing. So, and then you have it in data and stuff too, and with an object that has an interface and clearly does one thing. So it's a great thing to be able to have that shared terminology between both. And AngularJS is awesome to hook up to a REST API. Modern web design trends, because of hooking up with mobile phones and everything, is to keep the REST API on the server and then have the respective different ways that people are going to use the service, like a website or a mobile site or whatever. You hook up to the REST API and the server just provides that data and potentially HTML. So keep it simple. There's less code to write. Remember that jQuery versus AngularJS example that I went through. That was 18 lines versus 48 just to do the same sort of thing. It's writing less code is good if it does the same stuff. It's less to maintain, easier to test for the most part. So another thing, creating directives that encourage reuse. How cool is it to be able to create a reusable directive that's uses an attribute, just like that ng enter thing. Just slap that ng enter on any other element that needs to enter something and is bound to a variable, and it's going to work. So that's kind of really encourages that, that collaboration with other developers, because of those reusable components, and also following object-oriented design principles that, a lot of people came up from the server side, doing MVC stuff. So having MVC in the browser and MVVM are kind of natural progressions for things. And so client-side templating, it's a good thing. We gotta to be able to kind of goes along with REST API and bringing stuff and having the view stuff be on the place where the view is happening, which is on the client side, it's on the web browser. So, and also it doesn't depend on jQuery, so you don't need to include both. If you're worried about having too much JavaScript load on your page, you don't have to worry about that. But for the most part, I mean, just depending on how strict you are with what you're loading in, and maybe how many users you have, what percentage of your users are mobile, that JavaScript stuff can start to be a drag. So what are some of the weaknesses? You got strengths, and I'm talking, I'm all hyping up AngularJS, but it's got weaknesses too. There's no server-side templating, so you can't take some of the same stuff, render it on the server, and have it sort of pre-computed for you, which can be a performance thing, but it's also an SEO thing. You can't. There's no real easy way to switch out to use a different templating engine. You're kind of, for the most part, you're stuck with that. And for some, I'm not sure if it's really a weakness or not, but I think for some, it's probably putting your functionality embedded in your HTML. Might not feel like it's a good separation of presentation and code. There are some ways that you can sort of get around that and maybe have things in code that are attached, but I kind of look at it like when you look at your HTML, that should be what you first take a look at. You should be able to tell what's going on, in general, big higher level sort of things by just looking at your code. And there's not a ton of markup in there, or not a ton of code in your HTML. But you should be able to get a pretty good feel for what's happening. Like if you have a front-end designer going through looking at stuff, should kind of have an idea of what the functionality is without having the front-end dev there or having to spider through code to figure out what's going on. So, so like I mentioned, SEO for public-facing web apps, it's difficult to achieve because there's no server-side templating. Because if a search engine comes to your site and you have a bunch of AngularJS templating included in your HTML, I mean, that doesn't have any of your data. And for SEO, you want to have your actual data that's on that page spiderable by the search engine bots. So so really, if you're making a web app with AngularJS and it's public facing and has content that needs to be discovered by search engines, it's probably not the best thing to start with. You might want to choose a different one, like Backbone or something else that can that also has a templating that's on there. But like I said, I think AngularJS, the people who are mainly in control of development, are aware of this and are working on solutions too. Using Phantom.js is a way that there's kind of a hack. I included the link in here to kind of go through and sort of render your stuff on the server, using JavaScript and then saving a snapshot of the HTML out. So, but it's pretty much a hack at this point. Maybe you can get it working, but I would almost just say, if you're going to do something with SEO for public facing, AngularJS is probably just not what you want to do at this point. You also have to be careful of overwatching. I mean, remember when I mentioned that you can, watch an array and, find out whenever elements are created or deleted, or watch a whole object, every property on a whole object get notified. So I mean, and then remember when I talked about how there's a big list of this stuff. So every time you go through and you have a change, it goes through and checks the values of every single thing that's on your list of stuff that you're watching. So as that list grows, obviously that takes processing time to go through and check. So just have to be sure that you're doing that in an efficient way. So I want to do a comparison of AngularJS versus Backbone because they seem to me like they're the most popular frameworks out there. Both have routing and the client-side routing where you have a path that's mapped to a controller and templates and stuff. And a REST API is easy to work with both. They both have it basically built in. AngularJS is more dependent on adding directives and attributes to the DOM, to HTML. So you're really extending HTML Backbone is not like that at all. AngularJS in general will result in less code written for your REST API and CRUD apps, especially if it's just sort of basic run-of-the-mill CRUD apps. Man, it's because of the two-way data binding, that's really what makes that work great. And the having the REST API stuff built in, and I showed how simple it was to just save. Works pretty good. Backbone JS coding style feels more similar to server-side backend coding, because you're extending objects and so you're writing a lot more code. So you're extending a model, you're extending a view. So it feels a lot more like what you would be used to on the server side. So in the case where maybe you have a smaller team and everybody needs to do both server and client side stuff, or they'll be flipping back and forth, or come from a more structured programming language background, like like a Java or a C# or something. Could be a lot easier way for people to get a hang of it. So AngularJS is designed to be able to easily share code. Directives are awesome. Just share something, slap an attribute on something, and send it some configuration, and then it can work. Backbone has plugins, just like jQuery has plugins and stuff. But it seems like to me, it seems really cool to be able to just pull something off of GitHub, toss a directive on, put some configuration in your scope, and it's working, like a charm. It just operates off your existing models. Pretty slick. So two-way data binding is built into AngularJS at the core. I think this is one of the huge benefits. You can do stuff in Backbone. There's some plugins, Stick It and stuff for Backbone, but I think it's truly important to have that as a built-in part, because it's really core to your framework and how it works. So I feel like that's a huge plus for AngularJS. So Backbone uses underscore for templating. And underscore can run on the server side using Node to generate those server side rendered templates. So again, like we were talking about the SEO thing, you need to have something that can generate a page that's all fully rendered, at least for that initial page load. So that's a huge plus for Backbone on that. And it's also pretty easy with Backbone to switch out and use other templating methods. Underscore is in there, and obviously the examples, because underscore is a requirement for Backbone, but just because it uses some of the other functions that underscore provides. But one of the other things that underscore provides is templating. So a lot of the Backbone examples show using underscore as the templating engine, but you can easily switch it out for something like Mustache because it's not as tightly coupled, which is good. So, and I have no idea which one's really more popular. I don't even know how to judge that. I usually just go to Stack Overflow and check some tags, and and see sort of velocity of questions and stuff like that. And I can't tell. I think they're both pretty popular. People are using them. I'm just glad people are using something other than some framework on top of jQuery, because they all have good benefits. So where do you head next? Got this intro here. The AngularJS site has a basic tutorial that goes through a lot of the pretty good stuff, and there's also a developer guide out there that kind of goes into some other kind of more detailed things. There was just I think the world's first Angular conference. I think that's how it was billed, and that was just in January 2014. So there's a bunch of videos that they've posted on their site, and potentially looking for the next one. Whenever the next ngconf is going to be. There's lots of free and paid video-based training at egghead.io. There's actually a ton of free videos that show a lot of the basics and even some not so basics. So definitely suggest plowing through those. And so all the code from this presentation, it's all publicly accessible. It's not like behind a password or anything. So there's a link here to my Plunker page. You can find all the examples. You can go in there. I don't know if you haven't used Plunker before, you can go in, you can fork them, you can modify and play with them right in the browser, change stuff, whatever you want to do. So you can make them your own, and so all that code's yours. So thanks, and I hope that you have learned a lot about AngularJS, and look forward to hearing from you. Feel free to connect up with me. I have the slides they're all on my blog, and of course hook up with me on LinkedIn and Twitter, and maybe we can work together and help each other out someday.